Okay, looks like we're live. Good turnout today. Good to see you. We're in Amos. Is it chapter 7? Six. I got 3 different numbers in there. I don't think. I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty sure we're not at 8. I think we'll do 6 just to be safe. So let's see who's watching. Hi, Juliana. Hi, Linda. And gather here. I'm going to turn around. You can say hi to everybody. I don't know if you can see, but say hello.
Hello.
Hi. Ev, Carla, Linda, Kitty. All right. So we're going to finish Amos. So if you got your Bible, open it up to Amos. And Amos, how many of you were you here last week?
No, but I listened to it.
But you listened, so you're caught up. Well, just real quick, we're in Amos. Amos lived in the 8th century BC. He lived near Jerusalem. He lived in the south of Israel, and he was called as a prophet. But he prophesied to the north, the kingdom of Israel, or what later became Samaria, and he was telling them their 2 sins. Do you remember the two kind of big sins that he was calling them out for? I hope you do, because that's really the whole point. What were the 2 sins? What were their problems that they were getting, that God was angry with them for?
Because they weren't true to God.
Okay, that's one. They were committing idolatry. And what was the other one? I hit this pretty hard, so you should remember.
Oh, the rich not taking care of the poor.
The rich not taking care of the poor. Yes, that's right. So the 2 sins are idolatry and taking advantage of the poor. And so that's good. Chapter 6. Woe to you who are complacent in Zion, and to you who feel secure on Mount Samaria, you notable men of the foremost nation, to whom the people of Israel come. So he says, notice they feel secure. All right, that's what woe to you who feel secure. You think you're safe. You think that your wealth will protect you. You think that your power will protect you, but it won't. Right? Because remember, I covered this yesterday too, or last week, they were pretty wealthy. They were doing pretty well under King Jeroboam, who was, remember, we looked at him in Kings, and he was a successful king, meaning he won military battles, and he was economically prosperous, but he was not moral. He was not, so he was economically and militarily a good king, but he was spiritually a bad king. So they feel secure because of their economic and military power, which sounds very familiar, does it not?
Yeah. Yes, definitely.
Go to Calneh and look at it, and go from there to Great Hamath, then go down to Gath and Philistia. Are they better off than your 2 kingdoms? Is their land larger than yours? So those are other nations surrounding them that had been overrun. So God is saying, look, you're not so big and powerful as you think you are. Go look at these other nations who are about the same as you, and look what happened to them. It would be like someone came to America and said, well, look what happened to the British Empire. Look at what happened to Rome. Yeah. If you think as Americans that your military and your money will keep you safe forever, just look at history. Other nations just as great as you have been brought down. You put off the evil day and bring near a reign of terror. You lie on beds inlaid with ivory and lounge on your couches. That rhetoric is consistent, right? Amos has a way of specifically targeting the rich. Remember, he talked about you cows of Bashan, talked about your summer and your winter houses, your mansions in your vacation, your vacation homes, they're going to be destroyed. Amos has a way of specifically targeting the wealthy. You lie on your beds inlaid with ivory and lounge on your couches. You dine on choice lambs and fattened calves. You drink champagne and eat caviar, to put it in modern terms. You strum away on your harps like David and improvise on musical instruments. You drink wine by the bowlful and use the finest lotions, but you do not grieve over the ruin of Joseph. Joseph meaning the poor among you. Joseph being the youngest brother who was thrown into prison, right? You don't take care of the weak. Therefore you will be among the first to go into exile. Your feasting and lounging will end. Again, so the rhetoric is very clearly aimed at the rich, and by invoking Joseph, it says you don't grieve over the ruin of Joseph. You don't care about the poor and the needy. And therefore, God is going to smite you. The sovereign Lord has, this is verse 8, the sovereign Lord has sworn by himself, the Lord God Almighty declares, I abhor the pride of Jacob, I detest his fortresses, I will deliver up the city and everything in it. So I don't like your pride, I don't like your fortresses. If 10 men are left in one house, they too will die. And if a relative who is to burn the bodies comes to carry them out of the house and asks anyone still hiding there, is anyone with you? And he says no, then he will say, hush, we must not mention the name of the Lord. For the Lord has given the command. In other words, you're going to be you don't fear God now, but you're going to fear God then. For the Lord has given the command, he will smash the great house into pieces and the small house into bits. Do horses run on rocky crags? Does one plow there with oxen? But you have turned justice into poison and the fruit of righteousness into bitterness. You who rejoice in the conquest of Lodabar and say, did we not take Karnaim by our own strength? So what they're bragging about their military. They're bragging about their conquests. Remember, because Jeroboam was a military successful king. For the Lord God Almighty declares, I will stir up a nation against you, O house of Israel, that will oppress you all the way from Nebo Hamath to the valley of Arabah. So the message is very simple. You're worshiping other gods, you don't care about the poor, so I'm gonna smite you, I'm gonna destroy you. And how am I gonna destroy you? Look at verse 14.
Raise up a nation against you.
I will raise up a nation against you. I will take another nation and I will use that nation to punish you. And that nation was Assyria, the capital of which is Nineveh. All right, that's chapter 6. Any questions? Let's see, Patty's on. Linda says hello. And yeah, Patty says hello too. Chapter 7. This is what the sovereign Lord showed me. He was preparing swarms of locusts after the king's share had been harvested, and just as the second crop was coming up, when they had stripped the land clean, I cried out, Sovereign Lord, forgive. How can Jacob survive? He is so small. So the Lord relented. This will not happen, the Lord said. So that's what's going on here is Amos is having a vision, right? This is what the sovereign Lord showed me. So this is a dream, right? A dream or a vision that the prophet Amos has, and he sees swarms of locusts after the king's share, meaning that's the king took his share of all the crops, and the second harvest was about to begin, and the locusts stripped the land clean. And that's a symbol, right? That's a vision, that's a symbol of God destroying Israel. And now the prophet intercedes, right? The prophet says, oh no, God, don't do this to them. So the prophet is praying to God on behalf of the people, saying, don't do this, be merciful. And that's what prophets have a long tradition of doing that too. Think of Moses. Do you remember when Moses goes up to Mount Sinai and he comes back down, and what have they done? They made the golden calf, and they've worshipped the golden calf. God is angry. God says, I'm going to wipe them all out and destroy them. And then Moses argues with God and says, don't destroy them. Moses intercedes, and Moses saves the people from God killing them. So Moses was the first prophet. So the prophets that come after do that too. So the Lord relented. This is verse 3. This will not happen, the Lord said. This is what the sovereign Lord showed me. The sovereign Lord was calling for judgment by fire. It dried up the great deep and devoured the land. Then I cried out, Sovereign Lord, I beg you, stop. How can Jacob survive? He's so small. And so the prophet's saying, God, don't do it. Don't kill him. Don't burn them all up. Be nice. They're so tiny. This will not happen either, the sovereign Lord said. So God, same thing. The prophet intercedes on behalf, and then God says, okay, I won't do it, which is exactly what happened with Moses and God. God doesn't destroy the people of Israel. This is what he showed me. So now another vision. We're seeing a vision here. This is a dream. This is something the prophet sees in his mind. This is what he showed me. The Lord was standing by a wall that had been built true to plumb, with a plumb line in his hand. You know what a plumb line is?
Yep, yeah, I was there.
It's a, yeah, you know, the weight on the end of a cord of some kind that shows you straight up and down, and that's how you make houses or walls straight. Now you get the metaphor there though. The plumb line is being used as a metaphor for judgment. In other words, God holds up a plumb line and he measures you. Are you straight? Are you on the straight and narrow? Do you line up with, so it's the plumb line is a metaphor for judgment. Just as a builder judges how correct a wall is, so God judges his people by a plumb line. Then the Lord said, "Look, I'm setting a plumb line among my people Israel. I will spare them no longer." Meaning, I'm coming to measure them to see whether they're straight and narrow or not, or whether they're on the straight and narrow. The high places of Isaac will be destroyed, and the sanctuaries of Israel will be ruined. With my sword I will rise against the house of Jeroboam. Remember that Jeroboam was the king, the one we talked about, who was successful but immoral. Then Amaziah the priest of Bethel sent a message to Jeroboam, king of Israel. So Amaziah is a priest. Bethel is a religious center in Samaria in the north. That's the place, you know the story of Jesus who meets the woman at the well? Jesus meets the Samaritan woman, and she says, "We worship on our mountain, but you worship in Jerusalem." Well, that Bethel is the place where the Samaritans worshipped. So Amaziah is a priest of this religious place in the north. And again, this is an illicit place. This is a place of idolatry. Amaziah is a priest that offers sacrifices to other gods. So this priest said to Amos, "Get out." Well, okay, first he sends a message to Jeroboam. "Amos is raising a conspiracy against you in the very heart of Israel. The land cannot bear all his words. For this is what Amos is saying: Jeroboam will die by the sword, and Israel will surely go into exile, away from their native land." So Amaziah is objecting. This was, Amaziah says, look, he writes to the king and says, "This prophet is speaking against you. This prophet is criticizing you. You need to shut him up." Right? Because we can't, he said, the land cannot bear all his words. In other words, the people don't want to hear it. They're upset by what he's saying. Make sense? Then Amaziah said to Amos, "Get out, you seer. Go back to the land of Judah. Go back where you came from. Get out of the north. Go back down south to Jerusalem. Go back down to Judah. Earn your bread there and do your prophesying there. Don't prophesy anymore at Bethel, because this is the king's sanctuary and the temple of the kingdom." In other words, get out. You don't belong here. We don't want you. Amos answered Amaziah, "I was neither a prophet nor a prophet's son, but I was a shepherd, and I also took care of sycamore fig trees." So I took care of sheep, and I grew an orchard, right? He's saying, I didn't ask to be a prophet. That's not my job, right? He's saying, I've got a day job. I don't need to earn my bread prophesying. "I also took care of sycamore fig trees, but the Lord took me from tending the flock and said to me, 'Go, prophesy to my people Israel. Now then, hear the word of the Lord. You say, do not prophesy against Israel. Stop preaching against the house of Isaac. Therefore, this is what the Lord says. Your wife will become a prostitute in the city, and your sons and daughters will fall by the sword. Your land will be measured and divided up, because you're going to be conquered." That's what happens when a foreign nation conquers you. Your women get sold into slavery and you get killed. "Your sons and daughters will fall by the sword. Your land will be measured and divided up, and you yourself will die in a pagan country. Because that's Assyria took people out of their homes and moved them somewhere else. That's exile. And Israel will certainly go into exile, away from their native land. All right, that's chapter 7. So that's chapter 7 is an interlude that gives a little bit of the political context and background. Right, this is what's going on with the head priest of the religious cult in the northern kingdom writes a letter to the king and tries to get Amos thrown out, banished. But it doesn't work. Here's chapter 8. This is what the sovereign Lord showed me, a basket of ripe fruit. So another vision. You see, this is something God showed him in a dream or in his mind's eye. A basket of ripe fruit. What do you see, Amos? He asked. A basket of ripe fruit, I answered. Then the Lord said to me, the time is ripe for my people Israel. I will spare them no longer. In that day, declares the sovereign Lord, the songs in the temple will turn to wailing, many, many bodies flung everywhere, silence. So that's, God is saying, look, my patience is running out. That's what the vision. Prophets use illustrations and metaphors to get their message across. You gotta appreciate poetry here to read the Bible. This basket of fruit is ripe, right? And that means Israel's ripe, and now is the time. They're not going to get many more chances, what God is saying. Now Amos preaches, hear this, you who trample the needy and do away with the poor of the land. I'm not making this up, right? You're seeing the clear theme of how the treatment of the poor is why God is angry. You trample the needy and do away with the poor of the land, saying, when will the new moon be over, that we may sell grain and the Sabbath be ended, that we may market wheat, skimping the measure, boosting the price, and cheating with dishonest scales. So these are business people. They like to make money, right? That they're saying, I can't wait till we can make more money, right? They're like Wall Street traders. Then he says, buying the poor with silver and the needy for a pair of sandals, selling even the sweepings with the wheat. Right, so mixing in the dust with the wheat so it weighs more so they can make more money. And then selling the poor and the needy, that's it wasn't slavery the way we practice slavery in America. It was kind of an indentured servitude situation where people who had lots of debts, who had no other choice, would have to sell themselves into indentured servitude. And so that's what they're doing. And God doesn't like indentured servitude because it's taking advantage of people's economic vulnerability to make them essentially slaves. We do the same thing, we just call it debt, right? Someone gets so in debt and they have no choice but to work in whatever job they can get. Verse 7, the Lord has sworn by the pride of Jacob, I will never forget anything they have done. Will not the land tremble for this, and all who live in it mourn? The whole land will rise like the Nile, it will be stirred up and then sink like the river of Egypt. In that day, declares the sovereign Lord, I will make the sun go down at noon, darken the earth in broad daylight. I will turn your religious feasts into mourning, and all your singing into weeping. I will make all of you wear sackcloth and shave your heads. I will make that time like mourning for an only son, and the end of it like a bitter day. So it's going to be a sad day for you, because you didn't listen and you didn't do what was right. The days are coming, declares the sovereign Lord, when I will send a famine through the land, not a famine of food or a thirst for water, but a famine of hearing the words of the Lord. Men will stagger from sea to sea and wander from north to east. So that's interesting. Famine there is a metaphor. It won't be a famine. There won't be a lack of food or a lack of water. There'll be a lack of teaching of the scriptures. Searching for the word of the Lord, but they won't find it. Verse 13, in that day the lovely young women and strong young men will faint because of thirst. They who swear by the shame of Samaria, or say, as surely as your God lives, O Dan, or as surely as the God of Beersheba lives, They will fall, never to rise again. So those are idolatrous vows. As surely as your God lives, that would be a false god, not the true God. All right. Notice again the themes. What this teaches us about God. God doesn't like idolatry, doesn't like us giving our devotion and our energy to things other than God. God doesn't like when the poor are taken advantage of. And God, what does God do about that? He punishes everyone. Notice this. God is not punishing individuals here. He's punishing the nation. The whole nation is going to be held to account for the way the poor are treated. Well, that's not...
Where everybody's punished.
Well, is that like America? I don't know.
Is that what's happening? Never mind. I'm a little confused. He went to Samaria and then he's back to... And he was chased out. He was not supposed to talk.
Well, he didn't leave, I don't think.
Oh, he didn't
He's
leave.
still preaching. And so Dan, for instance, is one of the tribes of the northern kingdom.
Oh,
Remember, Israel's 12 tribes,
oh.
and most of the 12 tribes settled in the north. Judah, the south, where Amos is from, is only the tribe of Judah, that's one of the tribes. Because remember, the tribes are named after the sons of Isaac, the 12 sons of Isaac. So the two tribes in the north are Judah and the youngest brother. I can't remember his name. Anyway, there's only two tribes in the south. It's going to come to me. But all the other 10 tribes that came from the 10
Israel.
sons, they're in northern Israel. And Dan is one of them.
Okay, so he's talking to Israel at this time.
Benjamin is sorry, I just remembered it. Benjamin is so Judah and Benjamin. So he's talking to the north. Yeah.
Oh,
He's talking to the northern kingdoms.
but he had been to the south.
Well, he was from the south.
Jeroboam.
Or he was born in the south.
So he's sticking his nose in.
Yeah, he's a foreigner. I mean, that's another
Yeah.
reason why they don't want to listen to him.
Right.
Be like if someone came from Mexico
Yeah.
and came up here and said, you Americans, you're awful. You worship money and you worship power and you worship fame and you don't care about the poor and God's going to destroy you. We would say, get back to Mexico, you jerk. We don't want to listen to you. That's what we would say probably, and it's all. Everything that happens is pretty much what you would expect to happen. But yeah, Amos is a foreigner to them. All right, chapter 9, it's the last chapter. I saw the Lord standing by the altar, another vision. And he said, strike the tops of the pillars so that the thresholds shake, bring them down on the heads of all the people. Those who are left I will kill with the sword. No one will get away, none will escape. Though they dig down to the depths of the grave, from there my hand will take them. Though they climb up to, so in other words, you can't hide. That reminds me, remember when this was during the last Iraq war and they found Saddam Hussein like hiding in a hole somewhere and he looked awful? But God is saying you can go dig a hole and try to hide in it, but they'll find you. So it's very... God or the prophet Amos is using very strong language and fear-inspiring words and imagery and threatening, right? If someone said this about America, we would arrest them as a terrorist, right? They're making terrorist threats. That's the severity of these words that Amos is speaking. Verse 2, though they dig down to the depths of the grave, from there my hand will take them. Though they climb up to the heavens, from there I will bring them down. In other words, you climb up to the mountains, can't get away in any direction. Though they hide themselves on the top of Carmel, which is a mountain, there I will hunt them down and seize them. Though they hide from me at the bottom of the sea, there I will command the serpent to bite them. It makes you think of Jonah, doesn't it? Right? You can't even hide from God at the bottom of the ocean. Though they are driven into exile by their enemies, there I will command the sword to slay them. I will fix my eyes upon them for evil and not for good. In other words, I'm gonna. We say that, the benediction, may the Lord bless you and keep you and make his face to shine upon you. Amos is playing off of that benediction. God's going to make his face shine upon you, but for not for good. That won't be pleasant, right? Okay, verse 5. The Lord Almighty, he who touches the earth and it melts, and all who live in it mourn. The whole land rises like the Nile and sinks like the river of Egypt. He who builds his lofty palace in the heavens and sets its foundation on the earth, who calls for the waters of the sea and pours them out of the face of the land. The Lord is his name. So the Lord is the creator of everything. Are not you Israelites the same to me as the Cushites, declares the Lord? That's a big insult. That's because Israel was God's own people, and God's saying, essentially, I'm going to disown you. You're going to be to me just like any other nation. You're no longer going to be special to me. Did I not bring Israel up from Egypt, the Philistines from Caphtor, and the Arameans from Kir? Surely the eyes of the sovereign Lord are on the sinful kingdom. I will destroy it from the face of the earth. Yet I will not totally destroy the house of Jacob, declares the Lord. For I will give the command, and I will shake the house of Israel among all the nations, as grain is shaken in a sieve, and not a pebble will reach the ground. All the sinners among my people will die by the sword. All who say, disaster will not overtake or meet us. So in other words, that's how we began. Those who feel secure. Those who say, disaster will not overtake or meet us. But he said, there's hope here, right? Because he says, I won't totally destroy Israel, just most of it. But I will preserve, he says, this is verse 11. In that day, I will restore David's fallen tent. I will repair its broken places, restore its ruins, and build it as it used to be, so that they may possess the remnant of Edom and all the nations that bear my name, declares the Lord. Who will do these things? So there's going to be a punishment, and most of Israel is going to be destroyed, but some of it will survive, and eventually Israel will be rebuilt. So there's the message of hope. It's taken us 9 chapters to get to it, but you've heard the warning of judgment and the promises of destruction, but there's also a promise of restoration, that after the punishment will come a rebuilding. In verse 13, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when the reaper will be overtaken by the plowman and the planter by the one treading grapes. New wine will drip from the mountains and flow from all the hills. You're going to have, it's like Nampa, we've got vineyards down there, and they're going to produce a lot of wine. I will bring back my exiled people, Israel. They will rebuild the ruined cities and live in them. They will plant vineyards and drink their wine. They will make gardens and eat their fruit. I will plant Israel in their own land, never again to be uprooted from the land I have given them, says the Lord your God. So eventually there will be a restoration. There will be a happy ending. The nation will be rebuilt. And wine, notice how important wine is to this. Wine is a symbol of God's blessing and favor. It's a symbol of that God is pleased with you. What do you take away from that? I mean, I think that was your question, Carla, is that what God is doing now? And I don't know. I don't think that's... What do you take away from this?
I think we're getting a big shake-up is what we're getting. But...
Well, I mean, what you should take away from this is not to try to predict what's going to happen to America. I don't know. But what you should take away from it is what God cares about. That God cares about how the poor are treated in the land. And if the poor are not being respected and taken care of, then God doesn't like that. So in other words,
right.
It is...
And you've mentioned the rich people in the land and so
right.
much.
And that God particularly expects the rich to take care of the poor. And that really speaks to all of us, since we're all rich, pretty basically. I mean, compared to, you might not be rich compared to your next door neighbor, but compared to the rest of the people living on the planet, everybody in this room's, we're the top 5% richest people in the world. There's a lot of people in the world, and though we're just middle class or whatever here, God's not. God looks at the whole world, and we are all in our way rich. So, the message is, I think, that God cares about the poor, and that we who have, I've got wine. My wine cabinet's full, right? I'm these people that Amos is talking to. I've got a very comfy bed myself. It doesn't have ivory in it, but it's a nice bed. So I need to care about the poor.
Yeah, and the greed and stuff is.
Yeah, beware of greed.
People.
That's another good takeaway.
Mine, verse 12 in my Bible.
Verse 12 of chapter 9.
Yeah.
Okay.
It said, okay, that they may possess the remnant of Edom.
Mm-hmm.
They're coming back, and all the Gentiles who are called by my name. Now, this is the Old Testament.
Mm-hmm.
So, is that a reference to the future, maybe? Or, they don't have to be old-time Jews, they're new-time Christians.
I mean, that's.
What do you think?
You're asking about what does that mean? All the nations that bear my name.
Well, it says all the Gentiles, so it's Jews
Right,
and
It's pointing towards, and yes. The answer is yes. The prophets do that. Amos does it here in just this one line, but Isaiah does it a lot too. That
so it's not only
they speak about a coming time when
the coming time.
when it won't just be Israel that know the Lord. It will be the
Uh-huh.
Gentiles as
Okay.
well. Yeah,
So,
and of course
the prophets knew something.
Christians see that as fulfilled in the church,
Okay.
where
That's interesting.
non-Jews get to, through Jesus, come to be children of Israel. That's what Paul said, right? Remember the image, the metaphor that Paul uses in Romans, that he says, in other words, Israel is the tree that grows up from Abraham, right? So Abraham is the tree, and the Jews are the Jews are the natural branches from that tree. But you, Gentiles, you've been grafted in. He uses that metaphor from
Right.
horticulture, right? You graft in branches to a tree, and the Gentiles are grafted into Israel. So Gentiles become God's chosen people through Jesus. Yeah, and the prophets seem to predict that will happen in some way.
New Testament. Good.
Okay, well that was fun. That ends Amos. We could start Micah now. Micah, if you got your Bible in front of you, just turn. I don't know, depends on the size of your font, but just turn probably 1 or 2 pages, because Jonah's a short book, and so is Obadiah's next, then Jonah, and then Micah. Micah lives in the same time. They may have overlapped too. Micah and Amos may have prophesied during roughly the same period, somewhere there in the 8th century BC. They may have even known each other or heard of each other, but Micah is also similar to Amos in that Micah was probably not a professional prophet, but it'll introduce us to Micah and tell us a little bit about who he is if we read carefully.
He's not a professional prophet?
Right.
Yeah, meaning that he wasn't, and there were professional prophets, people
Okay.
and they were usually employed by the king. The king would pay them, which that creates a problem.
Yeah.
Where if the king is paying you, you're going to tell the king what he wants to hear, right? Which is the same problem, though. That's the same issue that pastors have, right? Because you pay me, so I'm not going to tell you things. I'm going to be careful about what I tell you because I don't want you to be too mad at
You're
me.
not supposed to tickle the ears.
Normal.
Right. You're not supposed to tickle your congregation's ears, but the temptation is there when
Sure.
you're preaching or prophesying to the one who's paying you. Hopefully I am not. Hopefully I manage a good balance there of being faithful and not tickling ears. Okay. Chapter 1 of Micah. The word of the Lord that came to Micah of Moresheth during the reigns of Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah, the vision he saw concerning Samaria and Jerusalem. You know some of those names. Samaria is the northern kingdom. Jerusalem is the southern kingdom. So, right, the kingdom of the north, the kingdom of the south. Micah preaches to both, or the vision, right? These are visions he saw concerning them. And he prophesies during the reigns of these three kings, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah. Jerusalem is in Judah. Samaria is the northern kingdom, where Amos just was. Does that make sense to everybody? I just want you to, I think it's helpful if you can imagine where these places are and where they belong.
Yeah.
Does it make sense? Have I made it clear? Okay. Now, here Micah speaks. Hear, O peoples, all of you, listen, O earth, and all who are in it, that the sovereign Lord may witness against you, the Lord from his holy temple. Look, the Lord is coming from his dwelling place. He comes down and treads the high places of the earth. The mountains melt beneath him, and the valleys split apart like wax before the fire. So, God is an awesome God, and he reigns from, there's a song, right? God reigns from heaven above. But Micah's, with his words, creating this picture of a powerful God who the mountains melt beneath him, the valleys split apart like wax in the presence of God, like water rushing down a slope. All this is because of Jacob's transgression, because of the sins of the house of Israel. What is Jacob's transgression? Is it not Samaria? What is Judah's high place? Is it not Jerusalem? So Jacob is a metaphor for Samaria. Judah is a metaphor for, is the name and the metaphor for the southern kingdom. And Jerusalem is the capital of the southern kingdom. Therefore I will make Samaria a heap of rubble, a place for planting vineyards. I will pour her stones into the valley and lay bare her foundations. All her idols will be broken to pieces. All her temple gifts will be burned with fire. I will destroy all her images. So what's the prophet talking about? What's the sin?
We assume it's probably about the same, I guess. I don't
Well, look at
see it.
read verse 7 again.
7?
Read verse 7.
Oh, carved images. Oh, idolatry.
Idolatry.
Oh.
It's right there, verse 7. Should I read a little slower? Or am I going too fast?
Yeah.
Okay.
A little slower, because, yeah.
Okay. I'll try to read a little slower.
So,
Yeah. So that's verse 7 is the key. Micah's now talking about idolatry. Her idols will be broken to pieces. Her temple gifts, idolatrous temple gifts, will be burned with fire. I will destroy all her images. Images is a word for idols. Since she's gathered her gifts from the wages of prostitutes, as the wages of prostitutes, they will again be used. Okay. Why did she gather her gifts from the wages of prostitutes? Because idolatry is infidelity. Does that make sense? Verse 8. Because of this I will weep and wail. I will go about barefoot and naked. I will howl like a jackal and moan like an owl. For her wound is incurable. It has come to Judah. It has reached the very gate of my people, even Jerusalem itself. Tell it not in Gath, weep not at all. In Beth Ophrah, roll in the dust. Pass on in nakedness and shame. You who live in Saphir, those who live in Zanan will not come out. Beth Ezel is in mourning, its protection is taken from you. So those are surrounding nations, and Micah is saying that you're going to mourn, you're going to be sad. Those who live in Marath writhe in pain, waiting for relief, because disaster has come from the Lord. And God has punished these other nations, and he will punish you too. is the message. You who live in Lachish, harness the team to the chariot. You were the beginning of sin to the daughter of Zion, for the transgressions of Israel were found in you. So the idolatry, the Israel fell into idolatry by worshiping the gods of the nations around it. That's why he says, the sin began in you. They took their idols from the other nations, the pagan nations that surrounded them. Therefore you will give, verse 14, therefore you will give parting gifts to Moresheth Gath. The town of Asib will prove deceptive to the kings of Israel. I will bring a conqueror against you who live in Mareshah. This is all just talking about other nations around Israel. He who is the glory of Israel will come to Adullam. Shave your heads in mourning for the children in whom you delight. Make yourselves as bald as the vulture, for they will go from you into exile. Your children, in other words, your children will be taken as captives.
What?
Your children will be taken as captives, is the threat, the promise, or the prediction. All right, let's do one more chapter. Here's chapter 2. Woe to those who plan iniquity, to those who plot evil on their beds. At morning's light they carry it out, because it is in their power to do it. They covet fields and seize them, and houses and take them. They defraud a man of his home, a fellow man of his inheritance. Again, I want to point this out. This is, God cares about economics, right? The sins here are not sexual sins, and here in chapter 2, they're not idolatry. The sins here are sins of greed. That should be very clear from what you've read. The sin is sins of greed. They covet fields and take them, houses and take them, right? These are the bank officers who take people's homes from them. Woe to these. So they lay on their beds, right, and they think of ways that they can make money, and then they wake up in the morning and then they do it, and they amass wealth and power to themselves. This is a depiction of greed. Very clear and unmistakable. Right? So the message you should take from this is that God despises greed. Therefore the Lord says, I am planning disaster against this people, from which you cannot save yourselves. You will no longer walk proudly, for it will be a time of calamity. In that day men will ridicule you, they will taunt you with this mournful song. We are utterly ruined, my people's possession is divided up. He takes it from me, he assigns our fields to traitors. Therefore you will have no one in the assembly of the Lord to divide the land by lot. That's a reference to the Jubilee. I should cover that on another. I don't have time to cover that now. But but the irony. There's irony here, right? The fields that you've coveted, the fields that you've taken in your greed, will go to somebody else. Is what is right. He assigns our field to traitors. Our fields, so they're going to take all the wealth you've accumulated in your greed. God is going to give it to other people, to foreigners, right? Okay, verse 6. Do not prophesy, their prophets say. Now that's, okay, we covered this, but there were professional prophets employed by kings. That's their prophets. So the prophets who are paid say, don't prophesy. Don't prophesy about these things. That's verse 6. Disgrace will not overtake us. It's the same sentiment that we heard in Amos of those who felt secure and said, we're going to be fine. We're totally safe. We're untouchable. Nothing's going to get to us. So the paid prophets are telling Micah to shut up. That's basically it. Does that make sense? That's what verse 6 means. Or to put it in modern terms, it would be like you telling the preach, you shouldn't be preaching about that. I don't like that. Right? Sometimes preachers get told that. We don't like when you talk about those things. Don't talk about politics from the pulpit. We don't like it. That's what's going on. Should it be said, O house of Jacob, is the Spirit of the Lord angry? Does he do such things? Do not my words do good to him whose ways are upright? Lately my people have risen up like an enemy. You strip off the rich robe from those who pass by without a care, like men returning from battle. So you're thieves. You take what you want. You drive the women of my people from their pleasant homes. You take away my blessing from their children forever. Right? Because of people lose their homes because they can't afford them anymore. The economic disparity is causing the poor to lose their homes, to lose their fields, and God is angry about that. Some recent in world history. Think about what happened in the novel The Grapes of Wrath with Oklahoma and how all those farmers who were barely holding on, the banks ended up confiscating their farms, and they lost everything they had, and they had to come out to California. That's the kind of thing that was going on back in Micah's time in Israel. That's what Micah's referring to. You drive the women of my people from their pleasant homes. You take away my blessing being the land, from their children, right? So when those poor farmers lost their land and their homes, those farms had passed from generation to generation, and now the children aren't going to inherit them. That's what he means. You take away my blessing from their children forever. And God is angry that this is happening. And I'm pretty sure God was angry at what happened in the 1930s in Oklahoma as well. Get up, verse 10, get up, go away, for this is not your resting place, because it is defiled, it is ruined beyond all remedy. If a liar and deceiver comes and says, I love this. This is probably my favorite verse, definitely my favorite verse in Micah. But he says, if a liar and deceiver comes and says, I will prophesy for you plenty of wine and beer, he would be just the prophet for this people. That's like saying, and I don't think this is true of you, but it'd be like if I said, you know what, if you could bring in a pastor who would just tell you nice things and tell you you'd have lots of beer to drink, that's the kind of preacher you would like. That's what you want. Someone, in other words, Micah says you want a prophet who's going to say nice things, and you don't care whether it's lies or truth. You just want to hear positive things. You don't want to hear anything negative. You don't want to hear anything challenging. So yeah, if a liar and deceiver were to come and prophecy of wine and beer, that he would be just the prophet for you. That's the one you'd like. Verse 12, I will surely gather all of you, O Jacob. I will surely bring together the remnant of Israel. I will bring them together like sheep in a pen, like a flock in its pasture. The place will throng with people. The one who breaks open the way will go up before them. They will break through the gate and go out. Their king will pass through before them, the Lord at their head. So there's a shift there. Verse 11 is kind of Micah's last angry word to the people. And then he promises hope. He says, afterward, just like Amos did, after you're punished, there will come a time when God will restore you. Right? I'll bring you back together. I will gather you in a pen like a flock, and the king will be in the midst of you. And of course, Christians can't help but see in this a prediction of Jesus, right? Who is the king who will pass through before them, right? Jesus the king will be with you in your midst. So, okay, I'm going to stop there because there's only 10 minutes left, and we'll pick up next week in chapter 3. I'll make a little note here. We should probably finish Micah next week. What do you want to do next? Do you want to go ahead? We could just do. I often take these and I often take Amos, Micah, and Hosea together. But we might be getting tired prophets talking about how horrible people are and how God's going to smite them, we might want to move on to something different, and I wouldn't blame you. So think about that, and maybe we could, although I don't know, the book of Revelation is not much nicer or happier, although Revelation 2 has a promise of a happy ending.
Yes.
But it's, again, notice that theme. God punishes and then restores. That's a pattern that should stick in your mind. So another thing you could take away from this is God cares about greed. God cares about the poor. God cares about idolatry. But when God punishes, it's followed by a restoration. So God does not destroy his people entirely. He may punish them, but he always comes back to them and builds them back up. And that's why I would say God's punishment is always... God does not punish just to destroy. God punishes to eventually restore, which is why it's no secret I'm a universalist. I think that God's punishment always has a purpose, and its purpose is to purify and eventually to rebuild. God's justice is not just about inflicting. The word is retribution, right? There's retributive justice. That's eye for an eye. Retributive justice comes from the word retribution, and it's justice that says, you hurt me, I'm going to hurt you, right? That's retributive justice. Justice that intends to just impose the suffering that was given back, right? And that kind of justice, we use that kind of justice. That justice has a place in our world, and we use it as a deterrent, right?
Right.
But God's justice is not retributive. Because God's God. He doesn't have to do that. God's justice is ultimately to purify and restore. Anyway, that's a good takeaway. I'll let you go. God bless. We'll see you next week. Thanks, everyone. Oh, Bobby Collins. Hi, Bobby. Thanks for joining us. Thanks, Patty. Thanks, Linda. Thanks, Juliana. Glad you all could be with us. Have a good week. God bless.